Open world racing games have changed a lot in the over 30 years they've been around. We've seen incredible advances in the industry, and modern worlds can look and feel shockingly close to real life. But it feels like not everything is better today than it used to be, and some features and design choices we had decades ago have been lost to time. So today, let's look back at some of the most iconic open worlds in racing and see what they did right, what they might have done wrong, and what makes a good open world in a racing game. Now, racing games have technically had open worlds since as early as the late 80s, and while these are really technical marvels of their time and fun to see, one of the first true racing games to really have the style of open world that we're familiar with today would have been Midnight Club Street Racing, which released in the year 2000 for the PS2. It might not look like it from the gameplay, but this is actually a franchise inspired by Japan's notorious Midnight Club. In Midnight Club Street Racing, though, you start the game as a New York City cab driver who decides to join up with a local street racing gang, and you work your way up through the ranks to take down other drivers and become the new world champion. New York is, of course, available as an explorable area here, but London is as well, and not only is this one of the first true open world racers ever, this is also where we see the first example of recreated real-world locations in an open world. Obviously, this isn't actually a one-to-one recreation of Manhattan and London, but it's not a completely made-up location either. You can clearly see a lot of popular real-world landmarks like Times Square or Big Ben, and the road and geographical layouts are quite similar to the real thing, just very slimmed down and condensed. I think of game worlds like this as a sort of greatest hits of the real-world places. You don't need every single side street, but it's good to get the major points of interest in there. These locations in a game from 23 years ago are instantly recognizable to their real-world counterparts, and I've gotta say, have a shocking amount of detail to them as well. This is one of the first ever true open-world racing games, and we've got two open-world environments with immersive traffic, AI racers cruising the streets, NPC pedestrians walking through the city, and dozens of real-world landmarks and locations making the map feel memorable and full of variety. There was even a sort of police pursuit system. You know, I was around when this game first came out, and even for me today, looking back, it's wild to think about how fully realized this open world was. Now, one of the biggest issues in really any open world game, racing or not, is when the world is used as nothing more than a staging ground or empty sandbox to get you from one more focused gameplay element to the next. Sometimes the open world doesn't really feel like a feature in and of itself and isn't worth spending time in or exploring. The year 2000 was a simpler time for games, and players didn't expect as much as we do today, but luckily though, even here in Midnight Club, they thought of this a bit, and the open world does act as more than just a backdrop. Not only do you engage in seamless open-world street races with the other Midnight Club members, and benefit from knowing the roads so you can take better routes through those open races, there are also secrets to find by exploring on your own and unlocking hidden cars. Midnight Club Street Racing may have been a pretty rudimentary open world by today's standards, and might not seem that impressive at first glance, but this was essentially the first attempt at something like this, and they really set the bar high, and established a lot of standards for what open worlds should be providing for players. Now, let's jump forward a few years to what may just be my favorite open world of all time, or at least my most nostalgic, Bayview, in Need for Speed Underground 2. Underground 2 was released in 2004 and was Need for Speed's first foray into open-world racing. This did come after Midnight Club released their own sequel, but aside from that, not a lot of other racing games were doing an open world yet. You did have Tokyo Extreme Racer, which allows for some semi-open world cruising of Tokyo's highway network, but it doesn't have an open world in the truest sense. I still feel like it does deserve a shout though. So that said, really the racing genre's next big open world game was Underground 2. and Bayview is quite a bit different to Midnight Club's New York and London. For starters, the map is of course much bigger, and there's only one single game world separated by linked districts. There's no loading screens here, you can travel anywhere in the world seamlessly. But what Underground 2 did was lock certain parts of the map behind game progression. You start the game with only the city's main downtown area available to you, a bustling and lively district with a pretty spaghettified road network instead of a simple grid. Then, through major story beats, you'd unlock Beacon Hill, Jackson Heights, and Cole Harbor. There are also technically a few off-map areas you go to for URL races, the airport and the Bayview Speedway, as well as Drift and Street X events which take place in stadiums or parking garages. Underground 2 marks a huge technical step forward in open worlds. Where New York in Midnight Club took maybe a little over a minute to get from one end of the map to the other, it takes more time than that just to make it through one of Bayview's 4 main districts. And graphically as well, Underground 2's world is so much more vibrant, varied, and detailed than we've ever seen before. There are still some familiarities though. Of course, NPC traffic is a staple by now in open worlds. AI racers cruise the streets as well, and you can jump into unique outrun races with them where you have to get ahead by 1,000 feet to win. Unfortunately though, Bayview does take one step back by not having any pedestrians. Now this might seem like a small detail, but seeing actual people walking around, not just cars driving while cruising the open world, can do wonders for making the environment feel more alive. It is worth noting that this is often an issue tied to the game's rating, as having the ability to hit or even try to hit people in a car can bump your rating up with the ESRB. Another step back here, also somewhat related to age rating, is the absence of a cop pursuit system. We won't necessarily see this done well until Most Wanted in 2005, but it is worth reiterating that Midnight Club had police, and so did Need for Speed before Underground. It's hard to know if this was a technical or time restriction, or if it was an intentional design choice, as I would say the open world experience can be a bit of a double-edged sword with police, potentially making things more frustrating if you just want to get from point A to point B without starting a pursuit. But on the flip side, open world pursuits in games like Most Wanted are an absolute highlight, and something that to this day has been hard to beat. Those aspects aside though, Bayview brings the world to life in many other ways. The world is much more animated, with planes and trains viewable around the map, and we've got dynamic weather in the open world. The sky changes subtly between dawn and dusk, clear and overcast, and it can rain, which does affect your handling. This is another one of those seemingly small advancements that really can play a major role in improving the immersive feel of a world. The energy of an environment can feel completely different on a clear early morning or a dark rainy night. Now, for what it's worth, some of these changes were cleverly hidden behind tunnels and underpasses between districts, so it's not quite as dynamic as it might seem, but it still blends right into the normal gameplay, so if you aren't focused on it, it feels natural. Another step forward that Underground 2 took was the fact that its world wasn't just used for racing. This is one of the first times we'll see a sort of thematic open world mission. These often came in the form of magazine or DVD cover shoots, where we also see one of gaming's first photo modes. Granted, it did only exist here in these missions, but still, way ahead of its time in that regard. You had full control over the car and could pose against many of Bayview's more iconic landmarks. Now, of course, Bayview isn't a real place with real landmarks, unlike what we saw in Midnight Club. Need for Speed has chosen to build game worlds loosely inspired by real-world cities, while maintaining that freedom to create whatever they want. Bayview feels like LA and takes inspiration from a lot of Californian or West Coast areas, but it still manages to be completely its own. This is a trend Need for Speed will continue all the way up to today, and I've gotta say, I really enjoy this style of open world environment. It gives you a sense of familiarity while also giving the developers full creative freedom to build a world better suited to the gameplay. Midnight Club's New York was barely more than a grid, but Underground 2's map map feels so much better to drive, with a dense city center and quieter suburbs, a major highway network, industrial district with off-road areas, and mountain passes high above the city. The roads themselves help to define and add variety to the location, not just the scenery. Bayview does still offer a beautiful and memorable backdrop to the driving though, with so many areas that are often associated with cars. Big business plazas and carports in front of mansions, gas stations, mountain passes overlooking the city, vibrant modern downtowns, real racetracks, and parking garages nestled among skyscrapers. To make kind of a weird connection, these are all the spots you often see car photographers taking photos at. It feels like the developers just consumed a bunch of car media and then made sure to check off a list of all the popular recurring backdrops, and they stuffed all of them into Bayview. This creates a map that just feels like it's meant for cars, and is fun to explore just for the sake of exploring. You'll remember in Midnight Club there was some value in exploration, as the world held secrets in the form of hidden cars you could unlock. And in many ways, Underground 2 improved on the open world exploration significantly. Not only are little cash bonuses hidden all over the map, there are even hidden races. See, most races will show up on the map, but hidden races won't, and they often have much higher reward payouts. So in a game where you can be pretty strapped for cash, exploring the world had some very important value. On top of this, Underground 2 introduces one of the best features we'll ever see in open world racing games: interactable buildings. I know, it doesn't sound that flashy, but hear me out. There are 6 different types of buildings you can enter throughout all of Bayview: body shops, car lots, specialty shops, graphics shops, performance shops, and your garage. These are all real in-game locations you have to find and drive to. As you progress through the campaign, you'll get texts hinting you towards the location of a certain shop, and then it's up to you to find it based on that information. Not only does this give the world even more meaningful exploration and reward, the game's lack of fast travel means that you would interact with the world for much more than just getting to the next race. If you wanted to build a car, you'd drive to the car lot to buy one, then head to the right performance shop for upgrades, then drive out of town and install a body kit. Maybe next door was the graphics shop, and finally you could throw on some underglow at a specialties shop a few blocks away. This did slow down the gameplay, and I'm aware that some people don't like this and would rather just teleport to exactly where they need to go or have everything in one place. Sure, especially by today's standards, Underground 2 can play a bit slow, and I think the game could have benefited from a sort of district-to-district fast travel, but I think that too much convenience in an open world is a bad thing. It takes away from the experience and opportunities to break up the pace. In Underground 2, I like that instead of just going from race to race with nothing in between, the action is broken up by exploring and driving around to build cars, getting into open world outrun races, and more. There is some value in a game kind of forcing you to slow down and smell the roses, as it were. And having interactable buildings throughout the world heavily increases the value and usability of that world. It makes it more than just a backdrop. So in just 4 years, we have seen open worlds change and improve drastically. Some patterns and standard expected features are starting to emerge, and there is some significant innovation in the space. But not everything is carrying over, and it's already easy to point at old games and wish we had some of those features. Before we move on to our next bigger title, I do want to briefly mention Midnight Club's next installment, released in 2005, Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition. Their second game made some incremental improvements to the formula established in the first, but 3 really blew things out of the water. They kept the multiple city structure, but now we have 3, or 4 in the remix edition: San Diego, Atlanta, Detroit, and Tokyo. These worlds are a huge step forward in every way. Police make a return, there's still pedestrian traffic, jumps, shortcuts, and hidden collectibles dot the map, and AI drivers still cruise the open world. Underground 2 may have offered a different take and innovated in many exciting ways, but Midnight Club consistently improved on the formula they had established 5 years ago, and now their open worlds easily rivaled what Need for Speed was releasing. But now, I want to talk about another major shakeup in the open world racing genre, one that to this day is almost hard to believe. 2006 saw the release of Test Drive Unlimited. This game delivered a full-size 1-to-1 geographical replica of Hawaii's island of Oahu. This had not only never been done in racing games before, this had never been done to this level in gaming, period. The first Midnight Club game consisted of about 2 to 3 square miles of explorable area between both maps, and Underground 2 quadrupled that with a map size of about 10 square miles, but Test Drive Unlimited's map size is 600 square miles, and it's all drivable. You can off-road into the mountains pretty much as you please. This is an astronomical leap forward that sadly we will never really see again. Now, although the geography is the same, not every road is here. The real Oahu is much more dense, and Honolulu is much bigger in real life, but considering the technical limitations of the time, they were still able to recreate a good majority of the same major roads, and make good, well-inspired decisions where it just wasn't possible to make the map quite as dense as the real place. With a map size this big, we also got the longest race we had ever seen in an open world game, the Millionaire's Challenge, a race that takes you around the entire coastline and takes nearly an hour to complete in a high-end supercar. Fast travel was also very convenient in TDU, where you could instantly teleport to any road you've driven on before for free. For a game with a map this big, having a convenient travel system did make a lot of sense. Now, map size isn't everything, but a map on this scale is a pretty big novelty in and of itself. And luckily, this isn't really a case where the map is 45 miles wide, but only an inch deep. We may not have seen the same level of variety and handcrafted care that Need for Speed and Midnight Club had created, but even though it's just one island, it's the full island. There's farm fields, open coastline, big cities, small towns, mountain passes, and all the car infrastructure you'd expect from the real world. It really is a beautiful and varied island filled with plenty of sights. But let's bring it back to our established basics. We do have a police pursuit system, and even greater dynamic weather than we've had before. But unfortunately, we again don't see pedestrians walking around the open world, and there isn't too much of a gameplay reason to explore. Here, much of the reward for exploring was just the joy of exploration itself. You would unlock tuning shops, dealerships, clothing stores, and even some missions as you drove by them, but there weren't any hidden collectibles or real reasons to search through many of the lesser driven areas, with one major exception, which is a bit unfortunate because with such a big map, it would have been awesome to have more reasons to explore off the beaten path. TDU 2 sorta addressed this, but we'll touch on that later. That said, there is still some good value to the open world. Like I said, there are plenty of interactable buildings, car dealerships, real estate agents, tuning and clothing shops, and much more. This gave the world a lot of value on its own, because you would still need to find that Ferrari dealership in order to go to it and buy a Ferrari. The map wasn't just littered with events. It had player homes, clubhouses, car rental agencies, and so much more that filled the enormous map with purpose. Aside from just having a big map though, TDU made a couple other major strides for open world racing by adding social and lifestyle elements to the game. No longer did you need NPC racers to populate your open world. Now, when booting up the game in online mode, you would see other real players around the map. Back in 2006, this was an insane feature. We just didn't really see this outside of more dedicated MMOs. Now, suddenly the multiplayer racing game experience wasn't just about racing. It was about cruises, meets, player-driven police pursuits, and anything else you could think of in a big open-world car sandbox. You could even form your own clubs and buy in-game clubhouses to share with other members. These open worlds could now be social spaces, as well as competitive ones. And this was back in 2006. That wasn't the only thing Test Drive Unlimited innovated on, though, because throughout the whole game, a much heavier influence was put on lifestyle features. You could customize your character, buy and sell homes, and store your cars in garage spaces that you could see, and even the missions fed into this theming where it wasn't just about racing. You had things like car deliveries and courier missions, or model missions where you had to pick up a super hot babe and get her where she needed to go within the time limit while also driving smoothly. This is similar, but heavily expanded on from Underground 2, where the open world was used for thematic missions that fit the feel of the game. So Test Drive Unlimited marks another major leap forward in the open world racing experience, and is really the first example of the open world model we continue to see to this day. Throughout the next few years, we saw releases like Burnout Paradise, the franchise's first open world game, and a great evolution of their format. I'd love to spend some time on this one, but the video is already going to be way too long, and although they iterated heavily on their own format, much of what Burnout did in the open world space had already been done by that point. In the same year, we also saw Midnight Club LA, which didn't differ much from 3's execution, but continued to expand on existing features. It wasn't really until 2011 when we got another game to innovate heavily on the open world, the sequel to Test Drive Unlimited, creatively named Test Drive Unlimited 2. And while I normally wouldn't spend too much time on another game in the same franchise, TDU2 managed to yet again impressively innovate on the open world driving experience. TDU1's already insane map size was nearly doubled with the addition of Ibiza as another one-to-one creation alongside the revamped Oahu. Another major addition here was the ability to get out of your car and walk. Not everywhere, mind you, but in houses, showrooms, and a few other spaces, you could walk around and interact with your environment or other players. There was even a big casino on the secret island from TDU1, where you could gamble to win prizes, drink, and just hang out with other players. You could even get into a friend's car and just cruise around in the passenger seat. TDU2 also added more interactable spaces, with things like an airport to take you between islands, and a car wash, which is easily the best feature we'll talk about in this entire video. Seriously though, Test Drive Unlimited 2 is, to me, in many ways, the pinnacle of open world driving games. It checks just about every box set by previous racing games, many of its features are still impressive to this day, and this came out over a decade ago. In my opinion, if you just fixed up some bugs and server instability, slapped a fresh coat of paint and a better handling model onto TDU2, it would easily succeed today. Now, it may not have innovated in the same way that TDU did, but a franchise was about to come onto the scene that certainly refined and later dominated the open world racing experience. 1 year after TDU2's release, Forza would branch out from their motorsport roots and try something completely different: Horizon. This game took place in Colorado, had no police system, no pedestrian traffic, no houses or character customization, a much smaller map than TDU, with very limited off-roading ability, at least at launch, worse club features, and not even a major city, just a small town and some scattered suburbs. But what Forza Horizon did have was a damn good driving model, and a really impressive car list. See, the problem that every other game I've mentioned so far has had is that the driving often suffered, especially towards the late game. I adore games like Underground 2 and Midnight Club 3, but there is just no denying that the late game high-end cars are chaotic, the drifting is subpar, and the AI can be really frustrating. This is one of my only major gripes with the TDU series as well. There are hundreds of miles of incredible roads, but the handling model just isn't that enjoyable. But then Horizon comes in, with a car list and car physics borrowed from the already mature Motorsport series, and blows that out of the water. The cars behaved like real cars, but just a little better. They're more stable, have a bit more grip, and feel more fun and easy to drive. This took what could have been a bit of a stale open world and made it into an amazing automotive playground. Every single road in the map had so much value to it because the roads were fun to drive in fun cars. You could, and I did, spend hours in just one small section of the map trying to link together a solid drift line in an 8.6, or you could blast through the speed zones and traps dotted around the map. These are some of Horizon's other crowning open world achievements. Seamless, short, open world challenges that you could run over and over trying to climb the online leaderboard. Horizon had a decent bit more to do in the open world as well, with a sort of collectible in the form of smashable billboards that actually had an effect on gameplay by giving you discounts on car parts. There were events beyond just races too, including the iconic showcase events, now a staple of the series. There were also hidden barn finds throughout the world that, when found, would unlock a new car. This is similar to the collectible hidden wrecks we saw in TDU2 as an answer to the need for more exploration, but honestly, it even goes all the way back to Midnight Club Street Racing, where hidden cars were unlocked by finding secret spots in the world. Again, nothing here was really that new, it was just done really well. We even had a shop or interactable buildings system that managed to sort of solve the slowness of Underground 2, where you still had to go to the right shop to do certain things to your car or buy a new one, but every building was centered within the main festival site, meaning we had some good immersion without having to drive 5 minutes just to slap on some vinyls. They kinda solved the fast travel system as well, by not letting you go anywhere instantly, but giving you discoverable outposts around the map that allowed you to get roughly where you needed to go. Now, I've gotta say, elephant in the room, we all know Horizon is today the biggest open world racing franchise ever, by a country mile, but it honestly didn't open with that much of a bang. It reviewed and sold well enough, but it didn't make many waves or do anything too new, it just did what it did really well. The map managed to capture such a strong energy to it, with the music festival vibe. It had that instant classic feel, that same level of emotion and immersion that I felt driving through Bayview almost a decade earlier. The impressive car roster, rock-solid physics model, good single-player campaign, and decent online functionality meant that Horizon had some real lasting potential to it. But I do think there are some other reasons Forza Horizon managed to so quickly climb its way to the top of the open-world racing scene, and it doesn't really have to do with how good Horizon is. We've primarily talked about 3 other franchises so far in this video. Midnight Club, published by Rockstar, Need for Speed, published by EA, and Test Drive, published by Atari. In 2006, Rockstar San Diego, the studio that developed all the Midnight Club games, started work on Red Dead Redemption, and in 2010, it was released with immense success. It was one of the most expensive games ever made, and it paid off. RDR remains one of the most successful games in history. And shortly after, the studio was put to work on, some other sort of successful game. You might have heard of it. We haven't seen a Midnight Club game since. In December of 2008, EA announced they would be shutting down Black Box Studios, the team behind Underground, Most Wanted, Pro Street, and more. The iconic Black Box era ended. The studio that created some of the most iconic childhood favorites was dissolved and put onto other projects. Shortly after the somewhat fumbled release of Test Drive Unlimited 2, Atari laid off over half the staff of Eden Games, the team behind both TDU1 and 2. The studio would shut down entirely shortly after. So Test Drive Unlimited was dead, Midnight Club had gone missing, and Need for Speed was struggling to find its footing again, with Criterion now at the helm, previously the developers of Burnout. So when Horizon looked around in the early 2010s, it realized its competitors were gone. And luckily, Playground Games took this to heart, buckled down, and just 2 years later released a sequel, Horizon 2, set along the border of France and Italy. This game improved heavily on its predecessor, with a much bigger open world, not just in square mileage, but also in the fact that off-road was no longer off limits. Horizon 1 had walls and barriers everywhere, keeping you close to the designated path, but Horizon 2 opened it up TDU style and let you drive pretty much anywhere on the map. The fast travel system took a page out of the TDU book as well, now letting you go anywhere, as long as you've driven the road before. The physics were further improved, tuning was added, and the car list expanded to make that open world sandbox even better. Car meets were added, along with a somewhat bigger and more lively main city. The thing about Horizon, though, is that the cities aren't really meant to be the central player hubs. The festival sites are. And from a design point, I do think that's a really smart idea, because it means you don't need a city or town to create a lively area in your world. Just plop down a festival site and build it however you want to suit your needs, and then decorate it with a bunch of stages, lights, and people. Unfortunately, we did see what I think is a step back here. Instead of the festival site containing multiple different buildings that all have their own purpose, there is now only one main festival building where every aspect of car buying, building, and customizing can be done. This is, of course, more convenient, but to me, it moves gameplay out of the world and into menus, making the open world less meaningful. This is something Horizon was already a bit behind on. TDU had added so much value to the world with all the interactable buildings and purchasable, customizable homes, whereas Horizon's world was much more focused and acted as more of a backdrop to the very fun gameplay while not being part of the gameplay itself. Horizon 2 sold very well though, and the series was quickly starting to gain traction in a competition that not many other companies were still in. There was, however, one new player coming onto the scene with a pretty interesting concept for an open world. Just a few months after the release of Horizon 2, Ubisoft launched The Crew, a game that promised a good story focus, something missing in more recent racing titles, as well as a massive map. A recreation of the United States. Not full size, mind you, but still enormous. Test Drive Unlimited 2, in total between its two islands, had a little over 1,000 square miles of map. The Crew was one single 2,000 square mile recreation of the US, making it one of the biggest seamless open worlds ever in gaming, to this day. If you're up for a little hokey lore fun fact, The Crew is actually the first game I ever played as a content creator, before I was even known as Hokey Hoshi. I would go live on Twitch with my old screen name, put on some music, and just drive the Crew's map. It was so massive that a single immersive cruise from one end of the world to another would take up the entire stream. The game used airports and train stations as a sort of fast travel hub that could take you to regions of the map you hadn't been to yet, and a handful of major cities were built into the world in that same greatest hits inspiration style we saw all the way back in the first Midnight Club. The Crew did make a splash, and its open world was a big part of that, but it just didn't have too much else going for it. Horizon 2 may have had a way smaller map, but the moment-to-moment gameplay felt a lot stronger and had more lasting potential to most players. And then, suddenly Need for Speed announced a comeback, a return to the black box era underground style with a new studio at the helm, Ghost Games. This franchise reboot promised a return to greatness for Need for Speed, but fell flat on its delivery. There were some things to love. The customization was impressive, it had a great visual style, most of the character cameos were pretty cool, but besides having some very questionable vehicle handling and a story that many found hard to like, Need for Speed 2015 was just a game stuck in the past. In trying to redo the black box formula, they kind of forgot to do anything new. Games like TDU, Forza Horizon, and The Crew had done almost everything bigger and better, with a stronger online as well, leading to a longer game lifecycle and more replayability and community. And just 1 year after the NFS reboot, Forza delivered yet another blow with Horizon 3. What was previously just an Xbox exclusive was now on PC as well, meaning Need for Speed and The Crew had nowhere to hide. Horizon 3 expanded the map yet again, adding a big modern city bustling with life, and they plopped a festival site right in the middle of it. but there were also 3 other sites across the game's condensed greatest hits take on Australia. Character customization was added as well, but felt somewhat meaningless as you couldn't interact with the other online players outside of your car, and you rarely even saw your own character. The online experience was seamless though, and even if you played offline, the open world was still populated with drivatars, a sort of AI recreation of the real players they were named after. Horizon 3 also improved clubs and added drift zones and danger signs to the list of open world PR stunt challenges. The formula Horizon had set up in their first game was getting better every 2 years, but innovation was starting to slow down. In 2018, the Crew released a sequel ahead of Horizon 4's release, this time expanding out from just cars to now include planes, boats, and much more. They knew they couldn't compete anymore with the behemoth that Horizon was becoming, so they wisely chose to broaden their scope and turn this fictional America into more than just a car playground. They also added the ability to get out of your car and walk around, which is a feature I love and sorely miss from TDU. Horizon 4 released later that same year, and this time, instead of increasing the size of the map, they added seasons. The entire game world would change every week to give the environment a sort of fresh coat of paint. This, of course, had gameplay effects as well, because during summer the road surface was hotter and you'd get better grip, autumn had more rain leading to lots of wet roads, and in winter, well, everything was covered in snow. The lake would even freeze over, allowing you to drive across it only during winter. This was a great idea, and to me, this is the last true innovation we've seen in open world racing games. It helped the game feel fresh, encouraged you to try new cars or build for different seasons, and even meant certain open world challenges or collectibles were easier or harder during different seasons. Outside of this system though, everything else was familiar. We still didn't have police, pedestrians, houses were added but didn't really act as much more than fast travel hubs. The TDU housing system was much better, and character customization carried over from Horizon 3, now with clothing customization as well, but still not really meaning much for the gameplay as you never get out of your car. The map size still paled in comparison to TDU and the Crew, but the more handcrafted touch did lead to a world that looked gorgeous and was fun to drive. There's no denying that Horizon 4 is a beautiful game, but the world still didn't stand up well on its own. There weren't any interactable buildings outside of the festival site and your homes, which both served the exact same purpose, so much of the world didn't have purpose, and those automotive tropes, the gas stations, parking garages, and lively modern cities, were missing, replaced with a beautiful but somewhat lacking open world that felt more like the focus was on showcasing Great Britain and not on creating a space to showcase cars. Horizon 4 was starting to show that its formula needed a shakeup. But then, nothing really came after it. No more Crew games from Ubisoft, TDU was now long gone, along with Burnout and Midnight Club. Need for Speed did release Heat in 2019, but Ghost Games hadn't really managed to do anything with the new open world, and then they shut down. Both Turn 10 and Playground took time off to work more on Forza. For 3 years, nothing really happened in the open world racing game space. People just kept playing Horizon or the Crew and waiting for something new. Then, in the summer of 2021, Horizon 5 was announced, and later that same fall, released. Our prayers were answered, something new to break up the monotony and same old thing we'd been doing for years now. Oh, wait, no, this is just the same thing we had 3 years ago, and 2 years before that, and honestly kinda 2 years before that too. Horizon 5's world is the pinnacle of a now very tired formula, and with nobody else to compete against, Playground hasn't felt the need to innovate themselves. Horizon 5 sold and reviewed insanely well, and bugs aside, I do think it's a great game. It's just not a new game. It's a slightly better version of the slightly better version of the slightly better version of the game we got 10 years ago. Playground did tout one major new feature for Horizon 5's open world, the evolving world. The ability to not only change the game based on season, but also change it based on more unique scenarios, like holidays or special in-game events. New challenges and map locations could also be added incrementally over time. MMOs have been doing this for ages, but it had never really been seen in a racing game before. This was the feature that had me excited for Horizon 5's open world. I wanted that experience of seeing an ever-changing environment that years after release was completely unrecognizable, changed, and expanded. Unfortunately, this didn't happen even a little bit. Outside of a few PR stunts, the world is the exact same as it was over a year ago on release. Expansions still don't connect to the main game world, no new race layouts have been added, there's not even a new building or permanent billboard in the world. This could have been a huge innovation for the genre, but it just fell flat. And unfortunately, Horizon has been plagued with online issues and limited aging tech, meaning the world that should be populated with dozens of players ready to group up for meets, cruises, and races, instead feels barren and lonely. A stark contrast to how the game is marketed, and a sad reality because Horizon 5 is still insanely popular and played by hundreds of thousands of people, but it just doesn't feel like that when playing online in the open world. Luckily though, we've been through content droughts like this before. In the time between 2006 and 2011, not a lot happened to open worlds. But then, boom, TDU 2, Forza Horizon, Driver San Francisco, The Crew. I hope that we are on the cusp of another big leap forward. Many of the most recent releases have been tied to an aging console generation, and now we're able to be free of it. The next big open world racing game will be able to utilize what is now current gen hardware without having to worry about decade-old consoles. But I still have my worries. Need for Speed Unbound, which did only release on current hardware, innovated in some ways, largely in the campaign structure, and much to my surprise and happiness, finally added pedestrians to Need for Speed worlds, helping to make Lakeshore feel much more lively. But aside from that, the online experience, which these days is often so tightly tied to the open world experience, is lacking, and the open world itself hasn't really changed much from what they've released over the past 8 years. Test Drive Unlimited is also planning a new release this year, under new leadership, and one that I have faith can provide a good handling model. But unlike 1 and 2, Solar Crown's scope is much smaller, encompassing Hong Kong Island, a region about the same size as Horizon 5's version of Mexico. We haven't seen gameplay either, and although we do know there will again be a heavy focus on social and lifestyle features, and the road density should be much greater than what we see in Horizon or Need for Speed, this game is still a big unknown. All I can hope is that it at least lights a fire under Horizon's feet, and pushes them to innovate further for the not announced but very likely coming Forza Horizon 6. We also just recently saw the announcement of a new Crew game, the Crew Motorfest, which admittedly seems to just be Ubisoft's take on Forza Horizon, but I'm curious and hopeful to see what they can do differently. So we've looked at over 2 decades of open world racing games, and looked to the future as well. What lessons can we learn from the past, and have the successful franchises shown us what really is best? Or did they succeed in part due to luck and timing? I would love to combine the features that all of these franchises have nailed. The vibrancy and life that Midnight Club and Underground brought to their worlds, the pursuit systems from Most Wanted, the great social and lifestyle features in Test Drive, the sheer size of the Crew, and the strong gameplay elements and beauty of Forza Horizon. But it's a big ask to expect one game to add all the best versions of every feature we've seen over the last few decades. But competition breeds innovation, and lately, Horizon, the current king of open world racing, hasn't had a lot to compete with. So I'm placing my hopes in games like Solar Crown and Motorfest to not be better games in every way, but to try new things and drive stronger competition to push every studio harder so that we as players can reap the benefits and start seeing something truly new and innovative again in open world racing games. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video. I definitely did not expect this to go as long as it did, but as soon as I sat down to start writing, it just didn't stop. There's so much to cover in this space, and I still feel like I didn't do certain features, games, or even franchises enough justice, but I hope this still gave a good overall look at the evolution of open worlds in racing games. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.